Bonsoir, welcome to this École des Modernités lecture at the Giacometti Lab of the Giacometti Institute in Paris. I'm happy to welcome tonight Doris, who's sitting next to me. Thank you, Doris, for making it in Paris, because that was fortunate that we could have our agenda working together. So I'm very happy that you're able to give the lecture from Paris. Doris Zhang is a professor of art history at the University of Alabama. Her research focuses on modern art and contemporary East Asian art, as well as on cultural interaction between Asia and Europe, and she also has a specific focus on gender. In 2024, she published a book entitled Women of Chinese Modern Art, Gender and Reforming Traditions in National and Global Spheres, from the 1900s until 1930s. It was published by De Brill and it's available in English, and I highly recommend it. It explores the contributions of many artists and craftsmen and women, or women, embroiderers, calligraphers, and traditional painters in the development of modern Chinese and up to cultural diplomacy in the international stage of the 20th century, the first half of it. Tonight's lecture will be focusing on two figures of artists who came from China to Paris in the beginning of the 20th century. It's entitled Not a Complete Unknown, Jin Taotao and Pan Yuliang, two Chinese women artists in Paris. And the talk will help highlight the differences between the two experiences of those women, possibly open to the different experiences of those more numerous artists, bearing comparisons with artists operating in Paris, such as Suzanne Valadon or Émilie Charmy. Thank you again, Doris, for accepting this lecture. The floor is yours. We're happy to hear you. Thank you.
Oui, so, merci beaucoup de la Fondation Giacometti pour l'invitation. C'est un honneur pour moi de présenter une conférence ce soir. Et merci à Dr. Hugo Daniel pour ton hospitalité. Et merci à tous d'être venus. And sorry, my French is not good enough to present the lecture in French, so forgive me for doing it in English. So thank you again for coming, and thank you for the Foundation Giacometti for the invitation. It's really an honor to be here in Paris. And so this lecture, as Dr. Daniel was saying, that it focuses on two women artists. So these two, Jin Taotao and Pan Yuliang. And so they came from China and under very different circumstances, and they experienced the Parisian art world in very different ways as well. So Jin Taotao, the one on your left, it was a diplomat's wife who practiced traditionalist painting and calligraphy, and Pan Yuliang studied Western style art at the École des Beaux-Arts on a government sponsorship. So in this talk, I will contextualize their life and works in relations to contemporary French women artists such as Suzanne, Valadon, Émilie, Charmy, and also, Asian male artists who were living in Paris at the time. So I try to problematize and think about the notions of otherness, race, and gender identities in early 20th century transcultural modernism, especially here in Paris. So the background of the research that I started to think about was China at the turn of the 20th century. So if you know a little bit about Chinese art history, Chinese history, was that there was, at the end of the dynasty, Qing dynasty, there was a reform. So what happened during that time, is about that 10 years before the fall of the dynasty, was that Qing dynasty was in trouble, right? So internal crises and also external aggressions as well. So the government was trying to think about, okay, what could we do to save the country? So even Empress Dowager Cixi was on board at the end of it. Yeah, so if you know a little bit about her, was that she was always against reform, and also she was pictured as this really brutal person in the Western media as well. So one of the things that they were thinking about was the woman's question. Some scholar will translate it as woman's problem. Yeah, it depends on how you see it, because in Chinese, the 问题 could be both, all right? So what was that? Was that there was a thought about women in traditional China that they contributed nothing. All right, so at this point they said, okay, what women should learn now? Should we give them education, or how should they contribute to the society? But this is, of course, it is only the government say that, all right, women were all not contributing. But what we know was that if women from gentry family, they were well educated, of course they were also contributing to the workforce and economy, etc. So it was just that the reformers were trying to say that all women were illiterate, or that they had produced nothing, so therefore we have to give them something, all right? So that idea of gender was starting from the male reformers. So in the end, in 1907, just a few years before the fall of the dynasty, that they sanctioned public education for women. So it was for the general public, so popularized education for more women to be able to engage with it. So it didn't really help too much, but by the end of the dynasty, 1911, there was a Xinhai revolution led by Dr. Sun Yat-sen, and led to the downfall of the few thousand years of dynasty. So the founding of republics of China was in 1912. All right, so under that backdrops, I was thinking about some of these women, right, who are unusual, but also sometimes unusual. All right, so such as this one, Jin Taotao, who was born into a really wealthy silk merchant family in Nanxun, which is in Zhejiang province, and was beautiful. And she came from this family that sell a type of silk called tasli, right? It's a Chinese dialect, and then it was transliteration into a really weird tasli silk. But that silk was world famous. So there was a lot of foreigners, including European Americans would come to Nanxun to buy silk from them, all right? So her grandfather started the business, and they were considered one of the most wealthiest family in the region as well. So she was pretty privileged. But not only that, because of all the foreigners coming in, they were quite open-minded. So the family had a dark room, yeah, for photography. They have gramophones. They had all kinds of very interesting Western invention. So this is actually Nanxun. Yeah, I highly recommend you to go. And one day, it's so beautiful. All right, so this is a family complex. Now it's still there. And so I had the chance to go into the house. And it was the architecture, a mix of a little bit of Western style architecture and also traditional architecture. But one of the most interesting thing about the family is that, yeah, they have a large family, but they gave the girls a very good education. So Jin Taotao was in Shanghai attending that school that was opened by an American Southern Methodist, right? A missionary school, but for girls in China. And so in the end, these missionary schools, especially this type, was actually to educate women. Well, initially they were wanting to train Bible women, so they would marry these missionary and started spreading the gospel. But in the end, this type of school, because they teach English, they have various different types of education, it became an elite school for women. All right, so she attended this school for a few years, and it was said that she was fluent in English and even a bit of French that she could speak as well. So we will visit that in a moment. But one of the most important things in her life, or influence in her life, was her older brother, whose name is Jin Zhang. Yeah. So Jin Zhang was a government official, and also in the end he became a painter, and is very important in what we call the Beijing school. So there was a group of people in Beijing at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, that they promoted the idea of Song dynasty painting. So we're talking about 10th century or so. All right, so Jin Zhang was educated in the UK, and then he came back to China. It was pretty successful in his career as a diplomat and also government official as well. At one point, he was leading the ministries of justice for the Qing government as well. So here's Jin Zhang and, yeah, Jin Taotao. So at one point, they were in the UK. So Jin Taotao, at the age of about 20, she went to the UK. She went to London with one of her older sister, and Jin Cheng and 2 other brothers were already in the UK. So they were there for a year. Now, I kept thinking about this. There was not a lot of information about why they would go and why the family would let them go, right? It makes sense. They were open-minded, but sending 2 girls to a foreign place is actually a pretty daunting part in 1904, right? But I think what happens was that she was pretty open. She was probably a very determined woman, all right? By the age of 20, she would have been married, usually, at that time in China. But she was not, and she probably asked her father, could I go, right? Could I go and explore the world a little bit before I get married? And so, yeah, I guess they let her do that. But the important things about her brother was that they promoted, again, that idea of going back to traditional art. All right, so she was well trained in terms of her calligraphy and painting. So she was educated in the classics, even though she has that education at the material school, learning foreign things. So that testified to her calligraphic work, because this is a commemorative volume about her grandfather. And she was asked, actually, to use her calligraphy to write the epitaph, which was something that usually would be reserved for male relatives or a male friend as well. But for the granddaughter to be writing that, it was something quite extraordinary. Yeah. Okay, so then she came back to China, and she also had a bit of a career as an artist. Now this one is that she later on, her photographs were published in women's magazines, as you can see here. And then, yeah, brother was also there. Yeah, they were at one point in Paris together, but I'll tell you about that. At the age of 26, in the end, right, 26, think about that, she finally got married. She got married to another diplomat. I'll show the images in a little bit. But I want to focus on her work more. So on the left, on your left was a painting by Jin Taotao. It's called Goldfish and Lotus, and that's her specialty. So what they were trying to do with the brother and the whole Beijing School of Artists was that they were focusing on something called Zhen, okay? So naturalistic vividness. That in the Song dynasty painting, they believed that there was an indication of very advanced development of verisimilitude, right? Formlightness in pre-modern Chinese pictorial arts. So they've been promoting that idea that's saying that is even earlier than the Renaissance. Okay, so Chinese art was not all abstracts of ink painting that people thought about. So early 20th century, they were exhibiting works at world's fairs. And so they're all promoting this type of work, right? So her work, Jin Taotao's work on the left was pretty much, it's a tribute to the Song dynasty artist Liu Chai, who could really paint fish like they were really in water, very lively. So that is the type of work that she will be doing. And here's another one. So very long hand scrolls, that is only one section of it. So here's another one. Yeah, that she had these species of butterflies that she was painting. And again, the revival, the idea of Jin, naturalistic vividness in Song Dynasty. So what is interesting about her was that not only she was going with the tradition, but she actually brought something back with her, I believe, from the UK, was that she wrote about how she built an aquarium, okay, in glass aquarium, and then she would raise fish, goldfish, and then she would observe how they swim, and then she would paint them. So I think that idea of really observation is partly from the Song Dynasty, but also is kind of like a life drawing, right, that she was getting from the UK. Now, another thing, she did not really talk about her life that much. She had a couple of publications, but all about painting techniques. Or that another articles that I will show you in a bit, written in English, is about women's progress in China. But her life was kind of a mystery to me. But from her work, and I keep thinking about how her life is very traditional, but at the same time, very unusual. So I read a little bit about her brother's writing about her. So he talked about that when they were in London, they would stroll the museums, they went to the British Museum, they would look at Western style art while they were also, traveling on this ocean liner. They would wear Western style clothing, they were in first class, and they would dine with other guests as well. Now, one really interesting incident that happened when they were returning from the UK to China. When the ship passed by Boston, US, they got detained, right? Because there was an exclusion act. And they were Chinese, even though they were traveling in first class. They were not allowed to board, okay? So what happened in the end, it was okay. They were released back on the ship, and then they kept traveling. But what they had was a letter of the UK ambassador to the United States. Even with that letter, they got detained. But the stories tell me how powerful that family was also. Yeah, even though they got detained, right? That's another story about the problematic USA. But yeah, but you can see that they have all this diplomatic relationship that was happening, and also the wealth. And so Jin Taotao was definitely a very privileged woman in that sense. Okay, so that's another one that I really love, because she was looking at the Song Dynasty artist Trebor as well on this one. So before she got married, she was also exhibiting at different places, including this one in Australia, Melbourne, Australia. So of course, Jin Zhang at that time was a government official, and the Lei Qing government was really eager to show artwork around the world. So he was a commissioner for that exhibition. So when they were asking artwork, right, from Australian government, they went through the UK government, because at that time it was still the Commonwealth. And then they had to send work to Hong Kong, and then the work would go to Australia. It's a very interesting read for those documentation. But what happens here was Jin Taotao was very much, based on the traditional work that she was doing, she got an opportunity to show around the world. So I call it kind of a paradox of modern art in China at that time, because they were using traditionalist work to participate in modern exhibitions. And then they would say that, okay, these are actually our work right now. So they should be considered modernist work, yeah. So that's a question that we can visit a bit more. All right, so who is this person? The husband, right? So finally, at the age of 26, she got married, and she's married to this person called Katie Wang, or Kete Wang, yeah. So in Mandarin is Wang Jizheng, And in Cantonese, I think it's very close to the southern dialect, it's Wang Gai Zhang. Now you can see why the KT works here, right? So after a lot of research and going through different documentations, finally I made the connection between this person in Western representations, right, such as these books, Who's Who is in China, and Jin Taotao. Because I found there's a lot of works that Jin Taotao, when she published in English or foreign language, she would use that name, Madame Katie Wang, all right? So Madame Katie Wang was Jin Taotao, and who is this Wang Jizheng? He was actually a student in France. He studied here in Paris, and then eventually he got a job supervising the Chinese students in Paris. So when they got married in 1909, very immediately they were sent to Paris to stay here, all right? So for a year before the fall of the dynasty. So here he is with the two sons. So the left was mother, Jin Taotao, and the two sons and her mother. And the right was, the older boys was actually born in Paris. And so they gave him the nickname Bali, which is Chinese transliteration of Paris. So unfortunately, the boy died at the age of 8 after they gone back to China because of illness. All right, so that is the connection here, right? Paris and Jin Taotao. But I also want to mention how she was pretty much in both worlds. She wrote this book that's called Hao Liang Chi Le Ji, which is the album of the joy of the fish. So she laid out all of the techniques that she used and also historical precedents of documentations, of theory about painting fish and observation of fish, which is pretty incredible. Now, the book was made for teaching. So she was teaching some students in China in an art organization. And so eventually, luckily, the copy was hand copied by his youngest son, who later became a famous connoisseur of Chinese furniture and all the material culture as well. So he republished it in 1985, all right? So that's why I still get it. I still have it, and it's a treasure in terms of researching about this person. All right, so Hao Liang Chi Le Ji, very traditional, and the kind of language, classical language that she used was incredible. But at the same time, she would write something like that. She wrote in essay in English, Progress of Chinese Womanhood, because of her diplomatic positions. I guess that the publishers was asking her about, can you write something about that? So interestingly, this article later on was translated back into Chinese and published in a magazine in China as well. So here's what they say about her. All right, so Madame Katie Wang is an artist and a linguist, being well-versed in English and French, as well as her mother tongue. Her husband is the chief of the political department in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, I don't know how well her French would be, but it was said that later on, her son also said that she studied French when she was in Paris here for a year. So perhaps she could read, yeah, and maybe not really speak it. But yeah, it's incredible of the privilege that she had, but at the same time, as a person herself, that she was she wanted to learn, she wanted to do a lot of things. Even though in historical records now, she was almost unknown. But that's why she's not in a complete unknown, right? There's traces there that we can talk about her. So the brother, Jin Zhang, died early in 1926, but they already had groups of artists, the art society that was established. So later on, after he died, the son of Jin Zhang reestablished a society called Hushe. And so they were very, very active in participating in world expos, including this one at Liège in Belgium. and it was 1930. So the whole group was there, and they get a award for that as well. So as you can see, again, my point of them using traditionalist work actually to participate in World's Fair is because they believe that that is the way to do it, right? Nobody is going to show oil painting and for the Chinese pavilion in any of these expos as well. So there you go. So here's another one of how she participated in this global flow of culture. So they published this 胡适月刊, which is a monthly magazine for the society. And as you can see there, that they had English subtitle captions there. They wouldn't have the whole magazine with a lot of English, but then, yeah, whenever they have captions, they have English. And at the back of the magazines, they also said that they were sold to Singapore, San Francisco, Canada, and around the world as well. So one of the things that they wanted to promote, again, even though if you do not read Chinese, perhaps you will pick up a copy of that magazine and you will look at the paintings. And then there is the captions, at least, that they know what is going on there. Yeah, so it's very interesting, these traces of these artists participating. So I also want to point out that she was the only female member of this group that was established in 1920s with the brother. So here's a really interesting photographs, right? And perhaps she has this very strong identity as a woman as well. I do believe that she had that sense, but she was never really open about that. Even when she was writing the article about womanhood, she would say that, okay, the woman, yeah, foot binding is bad. Yeah, we should abandon foot binding. But there's certain professions that women should not engage with. Yeah, perhaps we'll just do the gentle thing, right? So there's one very conservative side of her, but it is very much in line with all the reformers where they were talking about women, what women should do, which is art. Believe it or not, they thought that art was practical, so women should be engaging with the artwork. So reformers, including Cai Yuanpei, was talking about that. He gave a few speeches about that, actually, of women, what women should do, and art was one of those very important ones. All right. So finally, I wanted to show you this because it is another trace about her diplomatic life, right? So here's a commemorative copy of La Chemin de Fer de Yunnan, which is from Kunming, China. They had, well, the French government, right, in Indochina, built this railroad from Kunming, China, down to Haiphong in northern Vietnam. So that was a commemorative volume. Now, I was searching something about that, and I realized that there was an exhibition about 10 years ago here about this. Yeah, I am going to look for the catalog of it, and now I'm very interested. So she was asked to write the cover. That is her calligraphy for that commemorative volume. So it has definitely something to do with the husband being the diplomat. So that led me to think about what her life was like here in Paris. So I can imagine her going to the Louvre, right, strolling the museums, looking at everything she could, and also very active as a diplomatic wife. But we don't know. We don't know. We have no trace now, other than this type of traces, which I think is very valuable in thinking about very early on in the first decade of 20th century, there was a Chinese woman here, artist, who might or might not have their work collected. Now that's another thing. The Chinese sources kept saying that her work was collected by a national museum in Paris, but I did ask Dr. Lefebvre, yes, Eric at Sanuski, he said no, but I just don't know. Yeah, I have to dig deep a little bit more. And I wonder what they meant by National Museum, right? Because when the Chinese are translating things, they could be mistranslating things, right? But it was allegedly that she has a work collected in French institution. So we'll think about that. All right, so change of tone a little bit. We will go into this person. Her name was Pan Yuliang. So this is a rundown of her life. Yeah. Some of you might know already online or hear that she is very well known in popular culture. So because of her life, she was born in Yangzhou in China, often at a very young age, so she was sold to a brothel in Wuhu. Yeah, so south of her hometown. And then one day, this person called Pan Zhanhua, who was a provincial custom officer, went to Wuhu, and I guess his colleague went to that brothel with him. And so he saw Pan Yuliang and decided to pay money to get her out of that brothel. Now, we don't know exactly what happened, and there's a lot of rumors saying that, oh, maybe she's actually just a servant there, but doesn't matter. I don't think it really mattered, but what really mattered was that she came from a very underprivileged background. So what happens was Pan Zhanhua took her to Shanghai, and they got married. Now, she was not the first wife, so she was the so-called concubine, and then, but she was very grateful. So her surname was actually Zhang, and now she changed her name to Pan. So Pan Yuliang, that's why she was called Pan Yuliang. So in Shanghai, she was very interested in the arts. Just so happened, there's a neighbor, an artist named Hong Ye. So Hong Ye was teaching at the Shanghai School of Art and Painting. So Pan Yuliang, according to the story, was that she saw Hong Ye painting, in oil painting, and she said she wanted to learn. Now, mind you though, also, Pan Yuliang was not very literate, okay, because of her lack of education. And so at that time when she went to Shanghai, Pan Zhanhua, the husband, sent her to girls' school to start learning how to read and write. And so one day she started to think that maybe I really want to learn painting. So she was learning a little bit from Hong Ye, the neighbor, and then eventually got into the Shanghai School of Art and Painting, which at that time started to have women. They admitted women as well. Okay, so then change of events. Yeah, her life is just so dramatic. So she was there for 3 years, and then at that time, in 1921, the Chinese government, now it's the Republic, they had a program called work study in France. So there's quite a few people who went through, including some important politicians as well. So the work study program was government funded, so they would get these students to go to the Institute of Franco-Chinoise in Lyon. So that's where they stop, okay? They start, and it's called 中法大学 in Chinese. And then they will brush up their French or whatever they needed to learn, and then they will go off to other institutions. So some of them went to study at the Sorbonne even, yeah, with a PhD degree in the end. Yeah, there was quite a few of them like that. And so that's what she did. And eventually she studied at the École de Beaux-Arts, and we'll get to that. And so she also studied in Rome for 3 years. And in 1928, she went back to China for 10 years. She was teaching, had a career. And in 1937, she returned to Paris, came back to Paris. And she never got back to China. So for 40 years, and she was here. Yeah, this morning we were just at the cemetery in Montparnasse, yeah, to visit her. Yeah, I've been here before and been to her grave, and yeah, it's good to be there to visit her again. All right, so coming back to the art education at the time, as I was saying a little earlier, that the idea that art was very useful for women as a career that encouraged them to maybe engage. Now, not necessarily as fine arts, but also skills that, you know, that they make something, right? Embroidery, or that they could be illustrators, that type of thing, right? So that is art that is not an art magazine. That's a women's magazine that was published around that time, and really encouraging it. Now, through my research, I realized that women's artists were really underrepresented. Surprise, surprise. But what I'm saying is that at that time, China was publishing a lot of art magazines, right? Art-focused magazines or journals. But the women's were really quite underrepresented in them. But these women's magazines actually was focusing on women and say that their careers is like that, where have they been, da, da, da. So I actually found a lot of information through looking through this kind of magazines. All right. So going back a little bit, when she was in China, they were already using life models. So as you can see this at the Shanghai School of Arts in 1915, that was opened by a really well-known male artist called Liu Haishu. And then Pan Yuliang studied there after they opened in 1918 and to 1921 here. So I think at that point she was already had the foundations of engaging with the human figure quite a bit. And this is precious. Photographs of the women, the first group of women from China that went to Lyon at the Institute of Franco-Chinoise. There's quite a few well-known ones, and one of them were the Sorbonne PhD student, here, but we're not focusing on her today. That's for another time. Here's Pan Yuliang, okay, and here's Fang Junbi, So Fang Junbi was another artist that was here, and she was studying at the École des Beaux-Arts as well, and she came from a privileged family. Now, interestingly, if we go back to these photographs, most of these women came from quite a privileged family. Now, although Pan Yuliang at that point had a husband who was a government official as well, so technically could still, because we could still call her that she had some privilege, but at the same time, her background is just kind of pulling her back, right, a little bit. And she had to work extra hard to be there. Now, I was in Lyon researching, I was looking through all the documentations, and she was writing letters in French, right? You can tell that she was hesitant in terms of handwriting. And my French is not that great, but I can also see that there's, it's very elementary. But then for the fact that she was only learning more Chinese when she had the chance to, and then a bit of English, and then French, it was really, really difficult for a woman at that time. So Fang Junbi, yes, was more privileged, so we could talk about her a little bit at some point, but I just want to focus on saying that, Pan Yuliang was not like most of them, right? So Fang Junbi, at this exhibition in 1925 in Paris, she was even an organizer, right, of the exhibition, one of the organizers. So more on her life. This is very interesting because that was the school record of Pan Yuliang when she entered the Institute of Franco-Chinoise. And you can see that, I don't know if you can see, her birthday is 1899. But in fact, she was born in 1895. And the tomb here is actually still 1899, but it's actually wrong. But I think what she had to do is to lie about her age at that point because she was a little older. So in order to get into school, it might be easier to be a little younger. So there you go. And as you can see, the transliteration of her name is Pan Yuliang, not Pan Yuliang. All right. So they've been using that name in all her French publication, actually, mostly, especially the older one. So to give you a sense of what she looked like while she was here in France. Okay, here comes a very interesting part, because all the Chinese literature, or everyone who's worked on Pan Yuliang said, oh, she did so well at the École des Beaux-Arts. And she was admitted as a full-time student, but in fact she was not. Yeah, that I could from my research, that she was actually auditing students, right? She was not fully admitted because they thought that she was not good enough. Now, when the students went off to other institutions, they actually would have to report back to Institute Franco-Chinois, and also the people at the Institute Franco-Chinois will also ask the institution to give them a report. So here's a very interesting one. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with early 20th century painters. Lucien Simon was a pretty well-known one. So here, he gave the report about Pan Yuliang. Mrs. Pan Yuliang is a very hardworking and industrious student for whom I have much sympathy. She has since received every effort to provide the support you wish to give her. And you know, sir, how hard it is to presume in any manner the progress of which a student could be capable, especially when it is a question of a foreigner. Pretty sad. I can only tell you that she is far from reaching the point where any education could become useful. I will add, because I owe you the truth, that I have not yet seen in her any special talents. All right. So there you go. Now, because this is such a scribble, I could not read it. I had a friend who's French to read it, and I hope it's accurate, okay? You can tell me if it's not. But that completely changed the way that I thought about her in her time in France and her education. All right, so I think she was fed up with the French system here, and so she applied for another scholarship. She's just so resourceful, right? If you think about that. She got a scholarship to go to study in Rome, right, at the Academy of Fine Arts there. And she was there for 3 years, right, 26 to 28. And I think most of her foundation, in the end, that her oil painting skills and all the skills that she gained, and sculpture as well, was from Rome. But there's very little research on her time at Rome. I think some scholars are working on it now. And I haven't done it myself because it's even more difficult than the French sources, because at some point I might. Okay, so there she is with her graduation. And one of the things that she was saying was that all her works that she produced in Paris were destroyed in a fire. So there's no trace of what the works look like. Yeah, so whether it's true or not, it is debatable, but in any case, all of the works that we can see here, that at least in those publications, was from the time that she was in Rome. All right. So she went back to China. Immediately, she had a few solo exhibitions. She was well celebrated all around, right, in art magazines, in women's magazines, in newspapers, because she was unusual, right? She went to France, came back with a pretty good credential, like France and Italy. And so here is her exhibition, one of her exhibitions there. And she was teaching in 2 institutions at the same time. One is in Nanjing, and the other one was her alma mater in Shanghai. And as you can see here, that they were pretty much adhering to the idea of using life model to teach the students Western style art. So here we can see that at that time, right, 1926, this work was pretty much done in Rome, but it's called a young French girl, okay, French woman. And so, yeah, she painted that. Now, this is definitely an academic style work, right? Pretty conservative, but then I think she was pretty much training herself, right, in the classical way, so that she has all the skills very solid. But then, once she got back to China, she started to go wild, right? A little bit wild, right? So, yeah, what does this work look like? Yeah, I think we all know, right? Matisse work. But is it just an imitation? I don't think so. I think what happens there was when she went back to China, she actually had a lot more freedom than when she was in Paris or in Italy, for the reasons that she was engaging with all different ideas. Now, there were publications that they would reproduce work of arts like Suzanne and Matisse and all this new modernists, right? So she was looking at this work that she was not allowed, definitely, to produce works like that while she was actually in Europe. So that's kind of another paradox there I'm thinking about. All right, in any case, that's more experimentation. And then eventually, she started to develop her own style. As you can see here, that is not completely just academic work, but it has the color scheme of the Fauvists a little bit, right? And the Impressionists as well. So this work was published in the Ladies' Journal, so it's women's magazine that I mentioned, but also it was exhibiting at the first national art exhibitions there. So the government was hosting these really large-scale art exhibitions and to encourage the work as well. So how does she came to develop her idea of being a woman artist? Now, I have a theory about that, because at that time, they were publishing a lot of these magazines. One of them was actually by the Association of Artists of Chinese Artists in France. So they came back to China, and then they started to want to spread those knowledge that they have gained in Paris here. So this one was published in the magazines published by them called Yifeng, the Art Trends. And so the article that I traced was, written by Louis Chauhonet. I don't know if there's well-known or not, but an art historian, right? Art historian that was, the article was published originally in 1933, and then it was translated by this woman artist, Ma Jiyu. So what the article talk about, I read both the Chinese and the French version of it. They actually talk about Valadon, they talk about Lempica, and all these artists and how they engage with the idea of being a woman artist. So it's very interesting. I think at this point is when she actually had those ideas germinating in her mind of being a female and an artist. Well, I don't know if we could call it feminist ideas yet, but I definitely think that she was very aware of that ideas at this point. Okay, so she returned to Paris in 1937, never went back to China. Now, it was very unclear why she came back here. It was said that she just wanted to be here for a little while, okay, to get some new ideas because she's been in China long enough and wanted to come back. But at that time, 1937, the Sino-Japanese wars were already happening. So it could be one of the reasons why it deterred her from going back. But then for the reasons, we have no idea why she, in the end, stayed for 40 years. Now, my speculations is that she actually enjoyed the freedom. She didn't want to just say that, because every time someone interviewed her, she'd say that, oh yeah, I still love my country, I still love my husband, I want to go back, but it's difficult. And one of the excuses that she gave was that because all her artwork belonged to the French government. I don't know whether it's true or not, like why. So she could not bring them back to China, and she did not want to be part with her arts, so therefore she never go back. Yeah, I don't know whether it's like, is it the truth here? I don't think so, right? If someone's artwork is probably belong to them. So that's a very interesting thing. Regardless, let's focus on her work here. So she joined the Union of Female Painters and Sculptors at one point. So that organization was founded in 1881 in Paris and aimed to promote the works of female artists. So they tend to be quite conservative in what they did, but nonetheless, they had a venue for the artists, the female artists. And in 1940s, I think Pan Yuliang participated in a few of those exhibitions as well. All right, so another organization that is founded in 1930 is the Société des Femmes Artistes Modernes, Modern Artists, Female Artists Society. Now, Pan Yuliang, I don't believe that she was a member because it was active from 1931 to 38, so by the time that she was here, 37, I don't think she was part of it. But what is different was that it's a cohort of female artists who were not happy with the union, yeah, because they were conservative, so they had an offshoot of this association that for modern female artists. So they had quite radical exhibitions, right? Especially something like this, right? Émilie Charmy, that was exhibiting paintings of the nude that is really quite different from the traditional male gaze. So here it's reclaiming the body, perhaps that's one of the ways we could talk about her works. Now, I started to look at the works of Pan Yuliang in the 1940s, early 1940s, and she was definitely using a lot of impasto that she didn't use before, and it's kind of had the sense that the body was, again, who was she painting that for, right? So if we use the logic of Charmy and Valadon and all these people, they were really trying to reclaim that from that traditions of female representation. All right, so another work that is quite striking is this one, Suzanne Valadon, you may have seen it, yeah. And is Catherine reclining nude on a panther's skin. And then I found this painting by Pan Yuliang on the left. Okay, so I wouldn't say there's a copy or that she was imitating, but definitely there's some influence there, okay? So with Valadon's work was pretty much about these foreshortenings that is very different from the traditional orderlies postures. And also, yes, it's not about sexual availability. And Pan Yuliang, on the other hand, right, was doing something very similar as well. So I think there's definitely some influence there. Now I don't think they crossed paths at all, like in terms of the time period or that the activities of Pan Yuliang herself. I really didn't think that they knew each other. I don't know. Yeah, there's no records about that. But I'm sure that Pan Yuliang was very conscious about the FAMs, the group's work there, and very consciously thinking about her own work as a woman artist and engaging with the female figures as well. All right, so continue with that, is that she then, in the 40s, she started to go back to her traditions, is using ink and brush on paper. So that is the Xuan paper, that is Chinese painting paper. And yeah, so she has very different trajectories than a lot of the women artists in China at that time. They would be training in traditional painting, and then they would go to do Western style painting. But for Pan Yuliang, it was actually reversed, right? She was trained in Western style first. But I think she started to think about her identity here as well, being a Chinese woman. Why would you keep engaging with oil painting when you have another traditions to go back to? So she started doing that. They're actually quite incredible in terms of the use of line and the way that she engaged with the undulating movements of those brushstrokes. So here she started to, from here, yeah, just outline, and then she started to add more colors and patterning. Then here as well, yeah, continue with that. And then finally, in the 1950s, she started to add those backgrounds with a lot of patterns. So I think she was thinking about, you know, how do you use this traditional medium to tell a story, for one thing, but also engage more with texture as well. So yeah, the three nude women, some scholars started to think about her tendency to lesbianism, but that is not my concern here. But either way, she's definitely really thinking about her identity as a woman and how she engaged with this long traditions of male-centric medium. Okay, so here's 1950s, right? Late 1950s, that's even more about storytelling. And I think at this point, she was getting a little frustrated with her not selling her works. Now, the fact is that she has about 4,000 works, in the end sent back to China. That means she did not sell a lot, and also in the auction market now, there are not a lot of works that are circulating, so we can tell that she was not well represented commercially, and also she was known to be quite poor, being in Paris at that time. So I think she was now thinking, okay, could I use my Chinese identity or even that idea of exoticism to sell her work? So she is changing that a little bit. Now she put this woman into this 1920s clothing, probably, from China. And then she's having this poker cards in front of her. If you look at the two things, it's kind of incongruent, right? It's unlikely combinations of things. And then I saw this work, yeah, also by Valadon. And yeah, the gypsy motif was very much about, you know, them being fortune tellers. Yeah, so that is what Valadon was engaging. So I think living in Montparnasse, yeah, Pan Yuliang was living here in the Montparnasse, that she was well aware of this type of motif. And then she wanted to make her work decipherable, but at the same time has a bit of exotic elements to it. So I think in the end, she did this type of work. And apparently this work was not sold, right? And it was still in the Anhui Museum when they brought all her work back to China. So yeah, it is heartbreaking in many ways, knowing that her whole history, in the end, she engaged with a certain motif and she wanted the public to like her works, but they didn't. Okay, so then I was looking at some of her other works as well, and I think what kind of influence or how she wants to engage with the Parisian art world. So then this one, yeah, we kind of already talked about the Matisse and also Suzanne type of thing, but I was looking at Le Meilleur, right? So an artist who is Belgian, right, but selling a lot of work in Paris, and so he had a wife in Bali. Yeah, and then he was there painting all this very exotic woman. And so, yeah, the exoticism really sells, right, for Le Meilleur, but not so much for Pan Yuliang, but I think she was actually trying to get her work in the commercial world there. So, I know I'm 10 minutes, yeah, okay. Yeah, so, yeah, some of these storytelling, and it's very difficult to decipher now, and I would say at this point, it is self-orientalizing. She was self-orientalizing. Look at the face of this woman. The slit eye was typically the kind of stereotype of Chinese people, and then she intentionally just not even has a nose for this woman. If you realize all of them has no nose, right? There's no facial features there. That, again, it's like a stereotype of those Chinese face, which makes me actually very uncomfortable, right, at this point looking at her work. Yeah, even though everyone wants to celebrate her work, but I have my reservation at this point about what she was doing. Okay. All right, so some of the other motifs that I think she was engaging, for example, here, yeah, the pastures. Yeah, a group of women dancing and having picnics, but then they were so out of place, right? There's no historical background there except the clothing, and there was not really specific time frame. So I think, again, she was really trying to engage with that language that people might be able to decipher what her works was like based on what she could see in the Parisian world at the time. So yeah, the pasture scenes, yeah, the middle class and engaging with those activities. And this is even more puzzling as a work that I really did not know, and I cannot understand what she was trying to do here. So if you know about her background, we talk about that. She grew up in a brothel, so perhaps that was something that she saw, right? So is it autobiographical? It's hard to tell. But then when she did a work like that, and it was really very much sexualizing the Chinese woman, and I find that really strange, for one thing. But again, maybe that is her way to trying to engage with the commercial art world of the Montparnasse, right, or Parisian art world, which you really have to stand out. There's so many people here, right? For example, the School of Paris, right? We have so many people coming from different parts of the world, and then how do you stand out in the Parisian art world? All right. So even though she was not commercially successful, she had some recognition. For example, she had a lot of salon participation. So this is one of those, and then she even got a write-up in the Chronicles des Arts. Yeah. And yeah, another one is this one. So her painting of these musicians, a singer, opera singer actually, was on the cover of this news about her participation. And she even have 2 solo exhibitions at a gallery called Galerie d'Orsay, which is actually owned by a Chinese person who's ambassador to the UN. So I guess he opened this gallery wanting to have a space for the Chinese artists to sell the work, but I don't believe that they represented her. And even if they did not make her a lot of money, right? Did not sell a lot of works. All right, so another thing that I wanted to mention was how she was very different. Her life was very different from these male artists from Asia. So some of you may know already, Zhao Qi or Zhao Qi, or Leonard Fujita. Yeah, so he was the famous one. Now, this is the fun part, okay? Very fun part. All right, just wait for it. So Pan Yuliang was in this film in 1957, directed by Jean-Claude Bernard. All right, let's watch the clip, and you're going to laugh.
De grecque en chinoise, voici chez elle le buste de la gracieuse Pan Yuliang près d'un jardinet fleuri. Elle-même et une jeune chinoise en costume brodé du pays. Quelques-unes de ses œuvres sur papier de riz, venues spécialement de là-bas. Après la Chine, le Japon. Le Japon est Fujita, chez qui demeure fidèle le souvenir de la belle Kiki. Fujita, ses cheveux à la frange, aujourd'hui blancs. Fujita, si fier d'être français, plus fier encore d'avoir toujours été de Montparnasse depuis la grande époque dont il demeure le vivant symbole. Les chats et les nus sont du passé. Son travail présent, que suit de près Madame Fujita, c'est une grande œuvre sur les 7 péchés capitaux dont il achève ici la luxure. Fujita, ses poupées, son passé, son présent.
There you go. What do you think? All right. First of all, the music is driving us crazy. We've been listening to that music. It's like, oh my goodness, that is, yeah. But yeah, you can see the difference of how they presented Fujita and how they presented Pan Yuliang, right? So Fujita was this superstar, and they actually had, there's a American author who was in Paris in the 1920s, and he wrote about Fujitas and said that there's a lot of small Fujitas because they were imitating his hairstyle and eyeglasses. And you might know that he was also involved with the model Kiki, right, Mandarin's model. Yeah, so he was the superstar in the Montparnasse, and you can hear that he was proud to be French and even more proud to be in the Montparnasse. All right, so that is very much a difference in terms of being a woman, and also I think she really could not be one of the boys, right? So she could not go to the bar and drink with them like Fujita or Zhao Wuji for that matter. Zhao Wuji later became really well known because he was able to be very quickly engage with other male artists in Montparnasse. All right, so, oh, yeah. So she gets some recognition at the Musée Chernusky. There was two directors, René Grousset and also the Dean Alisev, the former curators or directors of Chernusky. They were very much, they like her works, but also they wanted to really promote Chinese artists at the museum, contemporary artists. So by the end of her life, she had an exhibition, 4-person exhibition at the Chernusky just shortly before she died. All right, and here is, she was doing the bust of the former director of Chernusky, René Grousset here. So I am going to end very quickly, but here is the bust that is now on display at Chernusky. We just saw it yesterday. All right, so that is her self-portrait. So I wanted to show this work because I think that is the most candid work that she has ever done in terms of her self-portrait, self-representation. Yeah, I think it says it all, right, of her life in Paris. She had to engage with drinking and smoking, yeah, and it is one of those works that is not really just about the nude, but or the stories about the past, but really is her present moment, right? Very candid, and it also makes me sad as well. So that led to, finally, her grave. Yeah, we're just there. And if you're interested, it's in the 7th district in the cemetery, so you could go see it. All right, so she was buried here, and later on, her companion, believed to be her lover when she was in Paris, Wang Shouyi, was buried together. And we were talking with Dr. Lefebvre Eric yesterday at the Chernusky, and he just told me that they they dedicated this place for Pan Yuliang. You can't even find it on Google Maps yet because it's so recent, October 6th, and in Paris. So it is interesting. Again, she was not a complete unknown, and there are more people knowing about her work, and so why her, right? So Eric thinks that it could be political reasons because of the election coming up, that they wanted to have more Chinese people voting, but I think that's more than that. I think there's more idea of engaging with this artist that's quite unusual in her whole life, being in Paris, and went through so much to be here, right? Her past experience as being poor and underprivileged, and now, yeah, needs to be commemorated. So, thank you. If you have any questions, please. Yeah.